Nurse refused to treat black man. Then she saw his medical ID and turned pale. Chapter 1. Emergency room. Cold reception. The sliding glass doors of the emergency room whooshed open with a hiss, releasing a stale breeze of antiseptic air. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a cold white glow over the linoleum floors. It was nearly midnight, but the waiting area was far from quiet. Coughs, groans, and the faint hum of the television filled the space like background. Noise in a place that had long ago stopped noticing pain. Jeremiah Carter stepped in, hunched over slightly as if the weight of his chest was pressing him down. He clutched his rib cage with one hand, the other wrapped tightly around the strap of a worn canvas bag slung across his shoulder. His breaths came in short, shallow bursts, each one a battle. He wasn't bleeding. He didn't stumble in with gunshot wounds or scream in agony. But something in the way he moved deliberate, as if bracing for collapse, should have been enough. Except at WSN single quotes T. He approached the front desk. "Excuse me," he managed, his voice dry, strained. "I'm having trouble breathing. My chest." The nurse at the desk didn't look up at first. When she did, her eyes scanned him with cold precision. A black man, probably in his 40s, dressed in a wrinkled coat and faded jeans. No flashy watch. No gold chain. Nothing to distinguish him. Just black and breathing. "Forms are over there," she said, pointing without emotion toward a clipboard stack. "Take one, fill it out, and have a seat. We'll call you." Jeremiah blinked. He took a step closer, struggling. "Ma'am, I think I'm having a cardiac issue. I have a medical history. Please." The nurse Linda, her Namatag reed sighed. "Not loudly, but enough to make a point. You're not bleeding. No one's coding. If you can walk and talk, you can wait," she said flatly. "Please sit down." He stood there for a moment longer, clutching his chest. Linda's eyes returned to her screen. Jeremiah found a chair near the end of the row and lowered himself into it slowly. He stared ahead, unblinking, trying to regulate his breathing. The pain wasn't sharp, but it was deep, spreading like a slow tide across his torso. He knew these symptoms. He'd seen them in others. He knew how the body betrays itself before going dark. As he waited, a young white woman entered holding her wrist and winced dramatically. She didn't fill out a form. Linda motioned her to the back after just a few words. A few minutes later, a middle-aged white couple came in, the man clutching his knee. They were ushered through within seconds. Jeremiah watched silently. He wasn't unfamiliar with this. He'd grown up with it, been passed over, overlooked. That something about tonight made it harder to swallow. He had spent years saving lives, often in worse conditions than this. He had taught emergency medicine to soldiers in desert tents, stabilized trauma victims in makeshift hospitals. Yet here he was, just another anonymous black man in a room where urgency didn't seem to apply to his skin color. His breath caught. His head dipped. The last thing he saw before the blur was a flickering red exit sign above the door. Then the floor rushed up to meet him. "Sir?" A new voice, this one lighter, warmer, rushed, but not panicked. "Sir, can you hear me?" Jeremiah's eyes fluttered halfway open, but his body didn't respond. The voice belonged to a young woman, Latina, sharp eyes, steady hands. She knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "Hey, I need help over here," she called out, looking around the room. Linda didn't move. The younger nurse, Marisol, looked up sharply. "Ma'am, he's non-responsive." "Are you seriously just standing there?" Linda pursed her lips. "He walked in on his own. Probably just passed out. We see it all the time." Marisol's face tightened. "Then we treat it all the time." She waved over a security guard and motioned for a gurney. Jeremiah's body was lifted with care as Marisol checked his breathing. Shallow respiration, pulse irregular. "We need vitals now," she ordered, placing an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. Linda stood behind, arms crossed. "Do we even know who he is?" she asked. "He had trouble breathing." "He asked for help," Marisol shot back. "You told him to sit and wait. Do you even care what happens to him?" Linda didn't answer. Instead, she reached into Jaramir's coat to locate identification. She found a wallet, worn and soft, its edges frayed like a story retold too many times. Inside was a military ID. She flipped it open and froze. Dr. Jaramir Carter, trauma surgeon, U.S. Army Pentagon security clearance, emergency contact, DOD personnel affairs. Linda's face turned pale. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked down at the photo, him, younger, cleaner cut, in uniform, proud. It couldn't be. She stepped back, her knees weak. Marisol caught a glimpse. "Wait, he's a trauma surgeon?" "Pentagon clearance," Linda whispered, barely audible. Then louder, "Call a code blue. Get trauma team on standby. We need cardiac eval stat. This man's not just anybody." "He never was," Marisol muttered, already pushing the gurney forward. "You just refused to see it." As the team wheeled Jaramir down the corridor, Linda stood frozen, still holding the ID in her hand. The emergency room buzzed around her, phones ringing, pages being called, footsteps echoing across tile. But she was somewhere else now, somewhere quiet, somewhere ashamed. And in that stillness, she realized this night would not pass like any other. Chapter 2. A name from the shadows. The ID card trembled slightly in Linda's hand. The words glared back at her as if they had weight, as if they were a mirror. Dr. Jaramir Carter, trauma surgeon, U.S. Army Pentagon clearance. Linda's breath caught in her throat. A trauma surgeon? Pentagon? She stared at the photograph again, sharp uniform, posture like steel, eyes unwavering. There was no mistaking it. The man lying unconscious in the hallway just moments ago, the one she had ignored, dismissed, all but denied treatment, had once stood at the center of life or death, decisions in the most elite circles of American medicine, and she had told him to sit down and wait. Her hands, once confident, now trembled. She clutched the ID like it might disappear if she let go. Her lips moved without sound, trying to justify to herself what had just happened. But the words wouldn't come. The overhead speaker crackled. "Dr. Chun to Trauma Room 3, Stat." Linda snapped out of her trance and turned toward the hallway. "We need an advanced trauma team. This man is cardiac risk and military priority." Marisol was already pushing Jaramir down the corridor. He should have been priority when he walked. "In," she snapped, not even looking at Linda. A stretcher team met them halfway. The ER doctor, on call, a lanky man in his 40s named Dr. Marcus Chun, looked confused until he saw the ID Marisol handed him. "Oh hell," he muttered, eyes widening. "That's Dr. Carter?" "As in Jaramir Carter?" Marisol nodded. Collapsed. In the lobby, ignored for 15 minutes. Marcus didn't respond. He turned, barking orders to prep VIP Trauma Room 3 and Page Cardiology for immediate evaluation. "Let's go, move. Monitor vitals, get EKG leads on, start 4 fluids. Clear the central bay." Linda stood rooted by the nurse's station, her throat tightening. The sound around her became muffled, the way it does when adrenaline gives way to dread. Faces blurred past her, coworkers hustling, pages being shouted, wheels squealing across the tile floor. But in her ears, there was only one sentence echoing. "You told him to sit and wait." 2 hours later, the trauma bay had settled into a quieter rhythm. Jaramir had been stabilized and sedated. His heart had gone into mild arrhythmia, but the cardiology team was confident it was reversible. He would live. Linda sat alone in the break room, her fingers clutching a lukewarm cup of hospital coffee. The buzz of the vending machine was the only sound. The door swung open. It was Renee Jeffers, the nurse supervisor. African-American, firm, respected, and known across 3 departments for her razor-sharp standards and no-nonsense ethics. She closed the door behind her. "Linda," Renee said calmly, folding her arms, "we need to talk." Linda nodded slowly. "I know." Renee sat across from her. "What happened tonight?" Linda swallowed. "He came in complaining of shortness of breath, but he wasn't bleeding. No visible trauma. I followed protocol. Did you?" Renee's tone didn't rise, but there was steel beneath it. Linda hesitated. He didn't seem like what?" Renee leaned in slightly. "Like a trauma surgeon? Like someone with Pentagon clearance?" Linda opened her mouth. He didn't look like." "Say it," Renee said, her voice now cutting. "He didn't look like what? A doctor? Because he's black? Or because he wore a worn-out jacket instead of scrubs and a lanyard?" The silence between them thickened like wet cement. Renee leaned back, exhaling through her nose. "You know, what really scares me, Linda, it's not that you made a mistake. Everyone does. It's that you justified it to yourself the moment he walked in. You made a snap judgment that could have cost a man his life." "I didn't mean," Linda began. "I'm not here for your intentions," Renee interrupted. "I'm here for your actions." Linda's knuckles whitened around the coffee cup. "I've seen nurses profile patients before," Renee continued. "But this wasn't subtle. You didn't just hesitate, you refused care." Linda's eyes filled. "It wasn't about race. Then what was it about?" Renee asked, steady as a judge. "Was it the way he walked? The way he looked at you? Or maybe just the fact that you didn't expect someone like him to be someone important?" Linda looked down. She had no answer. "We'll have to file a formal incident report," Renee said after a long pause. "And I want you to know something, Linda. This is going to reach higher than this hospital. You denied treatment to a man with Pentagon clearance. There will be questions." Linda blinked, a tear rolling down her cheek. Renee's voice softened. Slightly, but not her message. "This isn't about saving your job anymore. This is about making sure it never happens again." Then she stood. "He's awake, by the way. Room 3B. You should talk to him." The hallway felt longer than usual as Linda walked slowly toward room 3B. Every step echoed like judgment. She passed the glass windows of patient-based faces watching, whispers from nurses. Her chest tightened. At the door, she paused. Her hand trembled before she raised it to knock. "Come in," said a calm voice from inside. She opened the door. Jeremiah was sitting upright, 4 in his arm, oxygen prongs in his nose. He looked tired, but alert. His eyes moved to her, steady and unreadable. Linda stepped in. The air between them was thick with what hadn't been said. She started. "Dr. Carter, I came to say save the formalities," he said quietly, but not unkindly. Linda looked down. "I didn't know who you were. That's the point, isn't it?" he said, looking directly at her. "You shouldn't have to." She nodded, ashamed. "I've seen it before," Jeremiah continued. "Walk into an EM jeans and I'm nobody. Show a badge and suddenly everyone remembers their training." Linda's lip trembled. "I judged you, and I'm so sorry." He let the silence stretch for a few seconds before speaking again. "You're not the first. You won't be the last. But you've got a choice now. What you do after this matters more than what you did before." Linda nodded slowly. "I'd like to make it right." Jeremiah gave a tired smile. "Start with the next patient." He turned his gaze back to the window where the first light of dawn was beginning to cut through the gray. Linda stood there for a long moment. Then she stepped back, closed the door quietly behind her, and didn't look away from her own reflection in the glass. For the first time in years, she didn't recognize the person she saw. Chapter 3. What you refused to see. The hospital room was quiet. The steady beeping of the heart monitor served as a metronome to Jeremiah Carter's recovery. Though he lay still, his mind was anything but. Every breath he took now was a triumph, not just against the episode he'd survived, but against the unspoken battle he'd endured for most of his life. Down the hall, whispers had started to ripple among the staff. That's Dr. Carter, the Pentagon surgeon? He worked in Afghanistan, didn't he? Didn't he save General Whitmore back in '09? And then it happened. The door opened and a familiar face peeked in, older now, with streaks of gray in his temples and lines carved into his brow by years of war and command. Jeremiah? The man said, his voice warm with disbelief. Jeremiah turned his head, eyes narrowing in recognition. Colonel Abrams, he said softly. Doctor, Abrams smiled, stepping into the room. Damn good to see you again. The two men shook hands, one from a hospital bed, the other still standing but clearly humbled. I heard about what happened, Abrams said, pulling up a chair. You gave them a scare. Jeremiah chuckled lightly. Not the first time I've collapsed under pressure. You saved me once, the colonel replied, his voice catching slightly. Bleeding out in that god-forsaken canyon in Helmand. You operated with a flashlight and a medic bag. You kept me alive. You remember? I remember everything. Jeremiah said. I remember how the bullets never cared about who we were. Abrams nodded slowly, eyes misting. You didn't ask if I was white or black or high-ranking. You just acted. That's who you were. Jeremiah closed his eyes for a second, letting the silence speak. Still am. Unbeknownst to them, just outside the door, Linda stood frozen. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. But the mention of Helmand and the unmistakable name Dr. Carter took her back 2 decades in an instant. It was 2008. Linda was barely 25 and serving as a nursing trainee on a military medical mission in Kandahar, Afghanistan. The heat was relentless, the dust got into everything, and the hum of medevac helicopters never truly stopped. She remembered the name. Dr. Carter whispered with awe in the tents. The surgeon who never slept, who operated for 16 hours straight, the one who had saved an entire convoy team during an ambush near the Pakistani border. She never met him. But she remembered one thing clearly. The way the other nurses, even the hardened combat medics, spoke about him like he was some kind of myth. He treats everyone, someone had said. Doesn't matter if you're American, Afghan, black, white, even Taliban, he just saves lives. Linda had idolized him from afar. In fact, she had written about it in her journal. She had even called him the man who made me believe medicine was sacred. That night, long after the halls had quieted and the shift reports filed, Linda sat alone in her small apartment above a liquor store on the edge of town. The lamp on her desk cast a warm pool of light over a dusty shoebox she had pulled from the back of a closet. Inside were mementos from her early nursing years, faded photos, dog-eared field manuals, and a slim leather journal with her initials scratched in the corner. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Page after page was filled with youthful, earnest handwriting. Most entries were about the exhaustion, the dirt, the constant adrenaline, but then she found it. July 18th, 2008, they say his name is Dr. Jeremiah Carter. He doesn't talk much. He's not tall or loud, but the way he moves, he commands the room without saying a word. Today he operated for 8 hours straight on men who were barely alive. No breaks, no complaint. They say he lost one patient and cried behind the medical tent so no one would see. I want to be like that. I want to remember that skin color doesn't matter when someone's bleeding. I want to stay human like he is. Linda's breath caught. She sat back in her chair. heart pounding. He was the man from her journal. That Jeremiah, and she hadn't even recognized him. She had refused to see what she once revered. Somewhere between the battlefield and bureaucracy, somewhere between her idealism and the grind of years in a city something had shifted inside her. She had let bias take root. She had let the daily tide of assumptions and shortcuts dull what she once believed. She had become the very thing she once vowed never to be. Tears welled in her eyes. This wasn't just shame. It was grief for the parts of herself she'd let slip away. She flipped the journal closed and sat in silence, the air in the room heavier than it had been in years. Outside, a police siren wailed distantly. A dog barked. Life went on, but inside Linda's small apartment, something broke open. A lie she'd lived with for too long had finally been exposed to the light, and it hurt like hell. Back at the hospital the next morning, Jeremiah's vitals were stable. Nurses moved in and out of his room with a quiet reverence now, no longer just a patient, but a figure they had come to respect, perhaps even revere. Linda hadn't come back to his room. Not yet. She didn't know if she could, but she knew this: she would return. Not for absolution, not for forgiveness, but because she owed him and herself something more than regret. She owed him the truth. Chapter 4. From Prejudice to Penitence. Sun had barely begun to rise when Linda Maynard stepped through the staff entrance of the hospital, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup of coffee. It was still warm, the kind brewed fresh. From the corner cafe across the street, the good kind, not the bitter swill in the nurses' lounge. She wasn't due on shift for another 2 hours. Her heels clicked softly on the tile as she made her way to room 3B, where Jeremiah Carter lay, recovering. Every step felt like a countdown. Her stomach twisted. Her throat ached with everything she hadn't said. She paused at the door, knocked twice, and waited. "Come in," said the familiar calm voice. Jeremiah was sitting upright again, flipping through a copy of the New England Journal of Medicine. The light from the window caught the faint gray in his beard. He looked up when she entered, unreadable as always. Linda stepped in quietly, holding out the cup of coffee. "It's not an apology in a cup," she said, "but it's a start." Jeremiah took it, nodded once, but said nothing. She sat down. Across from him, hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a few seconds, all she could hear was the slow, rhythmic beep of his heart monitor. "I was awful," she began, "and I'm not going to excuse it." Jeremiah watched her, waiting. "I let the years wear me down," she continued, voice cracking. "The paperwork, the overtime, the patients who lie, the addicts who fake pain, the noise, the sameness. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people and started seeing patterns, categories, risks, problems." She looked him in the eye. "But yesterday, I didn't just miss a diagnosis. I failed you as a human being." Her voice trembled. "I forgot the most sacred thing about medicine, that we treat people. We don't choose who's worthy." Tears filled her eyes, and this time she didn't blink them back. "I don't know how I got here," she whispered, "but I hate the person I became." Jeremiah remained still for a moment. Then, gently, he said, "You're not alone in that." Linda looked up, startled. "I've worked with hundreds of doctors and nurses," Jeremiah continued. "Many of them brilliant, some of them broken, and most of them just tired. But tired doesn't excuse cruelty." He leaned forward slightly. "I forgive you, Linda, but I won't stay silent about what happened." She nodded, expecting it. "You shouldn't." "I don't want your job," he added. "This isn't revenge. It's bigger than that." He paused, then said clearly, "I want the hospital to start a mandatory training program, something real. A workshop on cultural humility, unconscious bias, medical equity, something that forces us to see people again." Linda's eyes widened. You want me to lead that? No, he said. I want you to be the first to speak at it. She blinked. You want me to tell them what I did? I want you to tell them what you almost cost, he said quietly. Because there's not a nurse in this place who hasn't made a snap judgment. But most don't get the chance to face it. You did. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. I'll do it, she said. Jeremiah smiled, and for the first time, she felt the tension in the room ease just a little. 1 week later, the auditorium was nearly full. Nurses, doctors, physicians, assistants, admin staff, over 200 people packed into the hospital's largest conference space. Some came because they were required. Others came because they'd heard whispers about what happened. Still others came out of curiosity. At the front stood Renee Jeffers, nurse supervisor, introducing the hospital's new initiative, Care Without Color, a training program designed to challenge bias in clinical settings. Then she stepped aside, and Linda walked up to the podium. The room hushed. She didn't carry notes. Her voice wavered at first, but her eyes never left the crowd. I've worked in this hospital for over 2 decades, she began. And I thought I was good at my job, efficient, reliable, detail-oriented. But last week, I looked a patient in the eye, a man who couldn't breathe, and I told him to sit down and wait. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. He wasn't loud. He wasn't aggressive. He was just black and tired and dressed like someone I didn't respect. She paused. I later learned his name was Dr. Jeremiah Carter, trauma surgeon, veteran, Pentagon-level clearance. But none of that should have mattered. What should have mattered was that he came to us for help. She took a breath. I failed him. A silence heavier than any she had ever stood in followed. No one moved. No one coughed. I'm not proud of this, she continued. But I'm telling you because I don't want anyone here to make the same mistake and not know they made it. She stepped back from the mic, her voice small but steady. If we can admit what we refuse to see, maybe we can finally begin to change. Then she walked off the stage. Jeremiah sat in the back of the room, wearing civilian clothes and a quiet expression. As Linda returned to her seat, their eyes met briefly. He gave her the faintest nod of approval. One by one, hands started clapping. Then rose. Then the whole room. Not loud. Not celebratory. But real. By the end of the month, the hospital board approved Jeremiah's proposed training program as a mandatory initiative for all medical staff. Posters went up across departments with a simple tagline, "See the person, not the prejudice." And once a month, Linda spoke to a new batch of incoming staff, not as a warning, but as a witness. Her story, raw, honest, and uncomfortable, became the starting point of something far more powerful than policy, humility, and, in that quiet, slow transformation, something sacred returned to the hospital halls. Chapter 5. Healed beyond the flesh. 1 month later, the halls of St. Benedict Medical Center looked the same: white walls, silver rails, soft fluorescent hum, but something had shifted in the way people moved. New posters lined the corridors, with bold text, "Beyond the Skin, where healing sees the whole person." Mandatory training sessions were now in full swing. They weren't the stiff, checkbox-style lectures most expected. Instead, they were real, honest, difficult. Stories were shared, questions asked, blind spots confronted, and at the heart of this quiet revolution was a man who had once collapsed. Outside the nurse's station with a failing heart and a full life still ahead of him, Jeremiah Carter didn't stay long after his recovery. He thanked the staff, shook hands with the board, and politely declined a formal plaque they tried to give him. The hospital had changed, but Jeremiah knew the work needed to be deeper, closer to the streets, among the people who rarely made it to hospital corridors before being turned away. So he packed his things and went where his calling had always led him into the community. It was a narrow brick building on the corner of 5th and Langston. The paint was chipped, the roof patched, but the sign above the door shone proudly, Langston Community Medical Center. No private funding, no marble floors. Just a waiting room with mismatched chairs, a check-in desk manned by a high school intern, and a clinic staffed by hearts bigger than their budgets. That's where Jeremiah returned. Here. Patients called him Doc J. Some knew his resume, most didn't. To them, he was the man who listened without checking the clock, the one who remembered their mother's diabetes and their daughter's asthma. And one Saturday afternoon, a familiar face appeared at the door. Linda? She wore jeans and a simple sweatshirt with the words "Be kind anyway" across the front. In her arms was a tote bag stuffed with gauze, antiseptics, and paperwork. No stethoscope. No name tag. Just humility. "I know you didn't expect me," she said, "but I was wondering if you needed an extra pair of hands on weekends." Jeremiah didn't smile. He just nodded, the way one soldier nods to another when words would only get in the way. "Gloves are in the back," he said. "We're short on flu shots and long on folks needing them." That was how it started. Linda came every Saturday. She didn't wear her hospital whites. She didn't ask for titles. She cleaned wounds, sorted supplies, and held hands. And slowly, something in her began to stitch itself back together. Not every week was easy. There were patients who looked at her and hesitated. Some recognized her face from the viral training video that had gone semi-public. But she never flinched. She just kept showing up. And Jeremiah? He didn't forgive and forget. He forgave and expected more. From her, from the system. From himself, they didn't become close. Not exactly. They didn't swap holiday gifts or meet for coffee. But there was a respect between them, hard-earned, quiet, and unwavering. Sometimes Linda would stay late. After the last patient left, they'd clean the counters in silence. The kind of silence that says, "We've been to war, and we're still here." Then one day, a boy came in. He was about 8 years old. Tall for his age, skinny knees poking out. From shorts, shoelaces untied. His mother walked beside him, eyes scanning the clinic nervously. At the front desk, the boy clung to her arm and whispered, "Mama, is this like the last place?" "No, baby," she replied softly, though the fear still sat behind her voice. Linda spotted them. She had just finished organizing the wound care tray when she stepped forward, kneeling slightly so she could meet the boy's eyes. "Hey there," she said gently. "I'm Linda. What's your name?" The boy looked up, hesitating. "Malik," he said finally. "Well, Malik," she smiled, "we're really glad you're here." He looked at her again, his voice barely audible. "Will they help me this time? Last place told me." "They said they weren't taking kids like me." Linda's heart clenched. She reached out slowly, then placed a hand over his. Her voice was soft, but it didn't shake. "Here," she said, "we heal hearts, not skin color. You're safe. You matter." The boy's mother blinked, swallowing emotion. Malik smiled shyly. Behind the counter, Jeremiah heard it all. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He simply watched as a wound deeper than infection began to heal, one child at a time, one act at a time. That evening, as the last light of sun fell across the floor, Jeremiah locked the front door behind them. Linda stood next to him, wiping her hands with a towel. She glanced over. "Think we made a dent today?" Jeremiah didn't look up from the lock. "Dents become doors if you keep pushing." Linda nodded. Then she turned to leave. But just before she stepped off the curb, she turned back and asked, "Hey, Doc J?" He raised an eyebrow. "You ever think maybe hearts heal faster than we think?" Jeremiah smiled, not the full smile of easy answers, but the slow, knowing one of a man who had seen too much to underestimate hope. "Only if we stop treating people like bodies," he said, and start seeing souls. Linda nodded once more, then walked into the evening, her silhouette long in the amber streetlight dot, and for the first time in a long time, the city didn't feel so divided. It felt human. Thank you for listening. Remember, true healing begins when we choose to see each other fully. Until next time, take care and stay human.